In the quiet hollows of western Missouri, whispers tell of two sisters who bound themselves to a single man, an arrangement that blurred the line between loyalty and sin. Disturbing echoes of this claim surfaced during the Mohler family investigations, where mock weddings and incest destroyed generations. But what really happened in those Ozark hollows? Did the sisters choose freely, or did they lose everything in a world too dark to understand? Welcome to Hidden Docs. Here we uncover the stories buried in America's darkest corners. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so these hidden files keep reaching you. Tonight's investigation takes us into the Ozarks, a place of rolling hills, tight-knit hollows, and whispered secrets. So this is not just folklore. It is a blend of rumor and reality, stitched together by court records, testimonies, and a chilling silence that still lingers. The Ozarks are not just a place on the map. They are a state of mind, a jagged expanse of limestone hills, dense forests, and winding rivers that carve through southern Missouri and northern Arkansas. For generations, families here survived by turning inward. Outsiders were not trusted. Roads were few. The nearest courthouse or sheriff could be a day's ride away, and even then, justice was selective. In this environment, whispers became a kind of currency. They carried warnings about feuds, tales of witches, and stories of families that blurred the lines of blood and marriage. These whispers fed a darker rumor, the story of two sisters who pledged themselves to one man. It was said they shared his bed, bore his children, and defended the arrangement with a loyalty that bordered on madness. But the rumor came with no official records, no photographs, no birth certificates. It existed only in fragments of local memory, passed from mouth to mouth in church basements and roadside diners. At first glance, it sounds like folklore, a rural ghost story about sin and punishment. But then reality intervened. In 2009, Missouri's Bates County erupted into the national spotlight when authorities uncovered the Mohler family scandal. Burrell Mohler Sr., a respected farmer, and 5 of his sons were accused of horrifying crimes stretching back to the 1970s. Prosecutors alleged incest, child rape, and perhaps most chilling, mock wedding ceremonies. According to sworn testimony, young girls were forced to stand in barns or living rooms, dressed in makeshift gowns, while vows were exchanged between them and older relatives. The ceremonies weren't legal, but they carried the full weight of control and coercion. CNN reported that some victims recalled being married as young as 6 years old, with family members looking on in silence. One victim described to investigators how she had been led into a ceremony where her abuser placed a ring on her finger. Another spoke of being photographed in bridal attire, the images hidden away but seared into memory. These accounts made headlines across the country, and suddenly, the whispers of the Ozarks seemed less like folklore and more like fragments of a disturbing truth. The Mohler case went further. Allegations surfaced about infants buried on the property, the result of forced pregnancies. A backhoe was even brought onto the family farm to search for remains. While no bodies were ultimately recovered, the accusations alone were enough to chill the community. Families who once dismissed such stories as gossip now found themselves wondering, if this could happen here, what else was possible? It's in this atmosphere that the legend of the sisters gained new traction. Perhaps they were not officially married in the eyes of the law, but the Mohler case proved that families could construct their own brutal systems of union and control hidden from the outside world. The idea of two sisters sharing one man suddenly seemed less like a myth and more like a possibility. To understand the fear these stories carried, you have to imagine the isolation. A farmhouse 5 miles down a dirt road, surrounded by woods thick enough to block out the sun. Neighbors who kept their distance. A family name that carried both pride and suspicion. In places like this, secrets could last generations. The sisters' story became a kind of parable. Some claimed they entered the arrangement willingly, hoping to pool resources and keep their children fed. Others insisted they were coerced by a domineering father figure, their choice nothing more than survival under threat. The truth was always out of reach, suspended between rumor and reality. What made the story terrifying was not just the possibility of its occurrence, but its silence. There were no police reports, no indictments, no newspaper clippings to confirm or deny. All that remained was a question. How many of these stories were buried before anyone could prove them? By the time the Mohler trial wound through courtrooms in 2010, the line between legend and fact had blurred beyond recognition. Residents of western Missouri remembered their own rumors, the sisters, the shared husband, and now they saw them through a darker lens. The Mohlers had shown the world that families could create secret systems of control and destruction. Could the sisters' story have been another one of those hidden files, never fully uncovered? The fear was no longer in the whisper itself, but in the recognition that whispers sometimes tell the truth. And in the Ozarks, truth has always been stranger and darker than fiction. In the quiet valleys of the Ozarks, where the dirt roads turn to mud after spring rain, life has never been easy. Poverty weighed on families like a second skin, and the further you traveled away from the highways, the deeper you sank into a world cut off from time. Electricity came late, schools were underfunded, doctors were hours away. In such places, family was not just blood, it was survival. And when survival depended on loyalty, outsiders were rarely welcome. Isolation is the first thread in this web of silence. Families who lived in the hills often distrusted government workers, teachers, even law enforcement. The less outsiders knew, the safer they felt. Secrets became the currency of survival. And those secrets, once rooted, grew into shadows that outsiders could barely trace. But it wasn't just poverty or distance. Religion carried its own weight here. Not the soft hymns of Sunday morning, but a harder creed, obedience, submission, and silence. Men became unquestioned patriarchs, and women were raised to believe that their worth lay in their ability to obey, to serve, to sacrifice. It was a belief passed down from generation to generation, hidden in sermons and whispered at kitchen tables. When prosecutors later looked into the Mohler family, they found stories that sounded too strange to believe. Secret ceremonies, where little girls were told they were becoming wives. Rituals disguised as faith but laced with abuse. Children convinced that silence was godliness. Court records spoke of mock weddings performed in basements, with fathers and brothers holding authority that blurred every line of morality. And here, reason collides with horror. Sisters sharing one man wasn't just folklore. It wasn't just a rumor in the hills. It was a reality that emerged when closed communities, trapped by poverty, manipulated by religion, and shielded by silence, turned inward on themselves. Some may ask, was it choice? Could two sisters really decide to marry the same man? In these stories, choice is a fragile word. Perhaps a woman chose because no other option existed. Perhaps coercion was dressed as duty. Perhaps survival itself required sacrifice. Either way, the outcome was the same. Lives bound in ways that defied law, logic, and human dignity. And as investigators uncovered more, they realized the Mohler case was not an isolated one. Across the Midwest, whispers of similar unions surfaced. Daughters married off in barns, cousins bound together in arrangements hidden from the outside world. A pattern emerged, not of fantasy but of systemic silence. It is here that legend becomes reality, and reason is the only lens to explain it. Not madness, not myth, but a cruel mix of isolation, desperation, and manipulation that allowed these stories to take root. Still, one question lingers, heavy and unresolved. If these stories were happening for generations, how many remained buried, never spoken, never recorded, sealed forever by silence? When the Mohler case finally broke into the open in 2009, it felt less like a courtroom trial and more like an excavation. Prosecutors weren't just presenting charges, they were digging into decades of silence, unearthing a hidden world that had survived behind church walls, farmhouses, and family secrets. The list of charges was staggering: incest, child rape, sodomy, sexual exploitation, and even the alleged burial of infants on family property. 7 members of the Mohler family were indicted, their names printed in black ink across Missouri newspapers. Overnight, whispers that had lingered in the hills for generations were transformed into legal documents stamped and filed. Courtroom testimony painted a haunting picture. Daughters spoke of being forced into marriages as children. One recalled a ceremony where she stood beside her father, told she was now his wife under God. Another claimed infants were born in secrecy and buried in shallow graves, their existence erased before the world could ever acknowledge them. The words fell heavy in the courtroom, silencing even the seasoned reporters who scribbled notes from the gallery. Yet the evidence was far from clear-cut. For every accusation, there were contradictions. Some family members denied everything, calling the stories fantasies, fabrications designed to destroy them. Defense attorneys argued that memories had been warped over time, that trauma and suggestion had blurred truth into fiction. Alleged burial sites were searched, but no bodies were ever found. The prosecutions leaned heavily on testimony, but physical evidence was scarce. It was here that the line between folklore and fact became dangerously thin. Could the rumors of sisters sharing one man, of children wed in basements, be proven beyond doubt? Or were they part of a cultural nightmare, half truth, half myth that had grown larger in the telling? Court files show how the accusations extended into areas that defied simple categorization. Was there ever a legal union between sisters and one man? No marriage licenses, no state records, nothing on paper. Yet the testimonies spoke of ceremonies carried out by candlelight, officiated not by law, but by patriarchal authority cloaked in religious justification. These ceremonies carried no legal standing, but to those who endured them they were binding, terrifying and real. Inconsistencies haunted the proceedings. One daughter described babies buried near a barn, another near a well. When investigators dug, nothing was found. Prosecutors pressed forward, but defense lawyers highlighted every gap, every contradiction, every missing detail. The jury was left balancing the weight of sworn testimony against the absence of hard proof. What emerged was not a clean resolution, but a gray zone. What had truly happened in those farmhouses and church basements? Which parts were provable crimes, and which belonged to a folklore of fear passed down within the community itself? The courtroom could not fully separate one from the other, and so the legend lived on. Not silenced by verdicts, not buried by acquittals, but suspended in the uneasy space between rumor and reality. Even now, the case remains a reminder that truth in these stories is never absolute, and the deepest secrets of America's hidden families may never be fully unearthed. Every secret has a breaking point. For the Mohler family, that moment came in 2009, when decades of whispered rumors erupted into flashing headlines and federal charges. The story that had once stayed buried in rural Missouri now sat on front pages across the nation. Fathers accused of marrying their daughters, sisters allegedly bound in a shared union with one man, children forced into silence through fear. The supposed pact, sisters bound together in secrecy, could not hold forever. Pregnancy became the undeniable evidence of abuse. Court testimony spoke of children conceived in silence, their origins masked by lies, their births hidden from the outside world. Where folklore spoke of ghostly unions, the reality was more brutal. Daughters bearing the children of fathers, brothers or shared husbands. Each birth deepened the secrecy, each life another layer of silence. When arrests came, they were swift and merciless. In November 2009, 6 men from the Mohler family were charged with over 200 counts of sexual abuse. Names once known only in their church community, George Mohler Sr., George Mohler Jr., and their kin, were now broadcast on CNN, NBC, and in the Kansas City Star. The nation watched as the rural Ozarks, long imagined as a place of folklore and moonlit myths, revealed a darkness no one could ignore. For the sisters, the collapse was both devastating and liberating. In the courtroom, they spoke through tears and trembling voices. Their childhoods were laid bare, mock weddings, basements turned into chapels, infants buried in secret. For the first time, silence gave way to speech. Yet with every word spoken, another bond broke. Families that had survived through collective silence now shattered under the weight of truth. The cost was enormous. Reputations that had stood for generations collapsed overnight. The Mohler family name became synonymous with abuse, secrecy, and betrayal. Freedoms were stripped away as men who once commanded respect in their community were marched into jail cells. And for the women, those sisters who once shared a man under the guise of faith, the losses were even deeper. Childhood stolen, families torn apart, trust permanently broken. Losing everything wasn't just about the collapse of a family empire or the shattering of a rural church community. It was about losing the very foundations of identity. For the survivors, even after the trials ended, the scars remained. Psychological wounds carved into memory. For the accused, guilty or not, their freedom and dignity were destroyed under the weight of allegations. The climax of the story wasn't a dramatic verdict or a single headline. It was the image of a family unraveling from the inside out. Its members turned against one another, its secrets ripped into daylight. What had been hidden for decades was now exposed for the world to see, and yet even in collapse, mysteries endured. Were the whispered pacts real, or had they grown larger through memory and trauma? Were the missing infants truly buried on farmland, or did they exist only in stories shaped by pain? The collapse brought answers, but it also left haunting questions. In the end, the sisters and the family as a whole didn't just lose their freedom or their name. They lost the one thing that had bound them all together: silence. And once silence was broken, nothing could ever be the same. When the dust settled, the Mohler family case faded from front-page news, but it never disappeared. In the Ozarks, it became something else. Half rumor, half memory. Some locals whispered about the sisters who had once shared one man. A tale spoken in the same breath as ghost stories and mountain legends. Others dismissed it as exaggeration, a sensational myth born from trauma and courtroom drama. The truth lived somewhere in between, preserved in sworn testimony, archived court files, and the memories of those who had survived. Yet even the official record carried gaps. Some charges were dropped, others dismissed, and still others quietly forgotten. What remained was a mosaic of fact and folklore, each piece jagged, incomplete, and deeply unsettling. The story endures not only because of its disturbing details, but because it reflects something larger: the isolation of rural America. In places where mistrust of outsiders runs deep, where faith and family intertwine, silence can become a prison. And in that silence, stories like this, half tragedy, half nightmare, repeat across generations. Were the sisters victims, complicit, or simply trapped in a world where choice was an illusion? No court ruling could fully answer that. What is clear is that they lost everything: their innocence, their family bonds, and their chance at a life unburdened by shadows. As the camera fades on the Ozark hills, quiet, rugged, and unchanged, the story lingers like a haunting echo. The truth may never be fully uncovered, but it will never be forgotten.